Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today, the transition. Logistically, switching administrations has always been done in a dangerous and terrible way, according to our expert on transitions, whom we'll meet shortly. And politically, how terrible and dangerous is this particular transition? Well, it's certainly controversial. One example, President-elect Trump's choice of ex-Breitbart News chief Stephen Bannon to be his senior advisor. One GOP strategist, John Weaver, who ran the John Kasich campaign, tweeted that, quote, "The racist, fascist, extreme right is represented footsteps from the Oval Office. Be very vigilant, America," unquote. So today we'll address the Trump transition, plus glass ceiling intact, what did shatter last week within the Democratic coalition. And later, in our evidence-based politics segment, climate change. To what degree is the next administration free, legally and politically, to heat up the planet? All this, but first, a new weekly feature we call Data-Based Politics. Votes tallied up so far show Hillary Clinton with a 1 million vote lead in the popular vote, which computes to a 1% margin over President-elect Trump. And the gap is predicted to widen as millions of ballots from heavily Democratic regions in California and elsewhere get added in. And according to Nate Silver's calculations over at 538, it's possible this will become the largest margin any losing candidate has put between themselves and an electoral college winner. It's important to note that before 2000, the president had lost the popular vote only 3 times, going all the way back to the 19th century. But over the past 16 years, such a split has happened twice. George W. Bush versus Al Gore, and now this. Both times, Democrats lost out. And according to Politico, it almost happened 6 more times since 1960. Especially frustrating Democrats this year were the very narrow electoral losses in the states they'd won in 2012. States like Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and likely Michigan were decided by margins hovering around 1%. And for what it's worth, analysis of exit polling indicates the changes in any one of the news events working against Clinton in the final weeks, the James Comey announcement, the WikiLeaks dump, Hillary's basket of deplorables comment, might have been enough to flip the election. Okay, now let's look at some other post-election numbers that should be disturbing to each and every citizen. The recent rise in intimidation and harassment. Between November 9th and November 14th, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks the hate groups, 892 of them nationwide, collected 437 reports of hateful intimidation and harassment from news reports and user submissions. 136 were reportedly inflicted upon immigrants, 89 targeted blacks, and roughly 40 incidents each targeted Muslims and the LGBT community. The center also reported 20 incidents that specifically targeted Trump supporters. Although most of the reports the site collected were anecdotal, the Law Center did follow up to confirm the majority of incidents reported online. We are happy to be able to say that the incidents now are waning, according to them. Also this week, in an effort to combat the continued proliferation of hate speech on their service, Twitter announced that the company had begun suspending the accounts of certain alt-right groups and others spreading hate speech. So what's to be learned from all this? How's the transition going, logistically and politically? Joining us, Bob Herbert, Demos Fellow, former New York Times columnist, and author of Losing Our Way, an intimate portrait of a troubled America. Rebecca Traister, writer-at-large for New York Magazine and The Cut, and author of All the Single Ladies. Her latest article in New York is entitled Shattered. And via Skype from Washington, D.C., Max Steir, founding president and CEO of the nonprofit Partisan for Public Service. which includes a Center for Presidential Transition. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for coming on and coming in. Rebecca, what shattered?
Oh, everything. I think a hopeful bet on the way that America is changing and improving. I think that one of the most salient features about the strategy that Hillary Clinton employed, especially in the general election, when there was some thought that she would move to the right, as is the tradition for Democratic candidates, especially ones who, like Hillary, have ill-earned reputations on the right as being to the far left, right? Right, Sorry. Exactly. So it's, one of the things her husband did, and that she would make a play for more conservative voters, either by shifting policy or the way that she spoke. And she made, I think what the data was telling her was a safe bet, but we now know was the most dangerous one, on a coalition of voters of color and women who were going to be able to elect her even if she did not wind up successfully appealing to a white working class. And it's interesting because that coalition that she was betting on is the very coalition of people who were excluded from our founding vision of America, who were disenfranchised, who were enslaved, who were considered subsidiary and not part of our representative government.
But did it have to be, and Bob, in your opinion, did it have to be sort of one or the other? Because a lot of the hand-wringing among Democrats now is that they ignored white working class voters, many of whom voted for Obama once or twice. And did you have to exclude them in your narrative if your candidate
I don't think
Clinton,
it's a question. I think that's the wrong way to frame it. I don't think it's a question of do you have to exclude one or the other. I think you have to acknowledge the extent of both the racism and the misogyny in this electorate, which played such a pivotal role in this election. So the question is not whether you have to appeal to one or the other. The question is how do you fight the racism and the misogyny going forward? That said, I think that Hillary made some fundamental mistakes. She could have, I would be opposed to a direct appeal to the white working class voters on that basis.
Well, not on ethnic identity,
but she didn't have
on economic pain.
Yeah, she didn't have a clear economic program to explain two things. One is how much progress had been made from the darkest days of the Great Recession under the Barack Obama administration, but acknowledging that there are still a lot of people who are struggling, and this is what we're going to do to assist them going forward.
I would argue that she had the plans. She didn't have a message that conveyed them. Mm-hmm. Because one thing that Hillary Clinton did have is a whole raft of policy that would benefit. She was in fact talking, though not effectively, about infrastructure. Infrastructure spending as being her first priority once she got into office, the very thing that Trump now says is going to be his priority. She's also talking about making health care more affordable, about paid leave, subsidized daycare, opiate addiction programs, all kinds of things that would have direct economic benefit, but she wasn't doing a good job of going to them and making her plans clear.
She was hitting Trump.
Yes.
All right,
I think she also took a lot of working class voters for granted in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, where she thought that they were already, behind her.
She didn't campaign. Let's transition to the transition. Max, how's it going?
A leading question here, I can tell. I think it's too early to know. The Trump team had put together a very robust pre-election transition effort, and at the moment, they have moved out the leadership that had led that work. It's unclear whether they're going to start from scratch or take advantage of the work that was done earlier. And
you're talking about firing Chris Christie as transition chief, right?
Well,
just to be clear.
Not just Chris Christie, but it's also the executive director, who was someone who reported directly to him and was pretty fundamental to the whole process. So it's still early days. Historically, most transition efforts didn't really get underway until after the election. It's an improvement and a necessary improvement to see this work being done earlier. But I think we have a ways to go before we have any real sense about whether the Trump folks will be ready. I mean, the important thing is that it's a huge undertaking. You've got 4,000 jobs you ultimately have to fill. And it's vital because it's not just about their being able to do what they say they want to do, but it's about keeping us safe.
Was your center, which is new, created because past transitions did not go quickly and smoothly enough to be ready on January 20th?
Yes. It's a fascinating phenomenon here, but this is one of the most vital processes of our government. It's how it starts, and it has started peacefully but ugly. And that's not good enough, particularly in today's day and age when you have the national security threats that are so prominent that we have to be worried about.
4,000 appointed positions. Did I see that number or hear that number correctly?
You're right. 1,100 of those are Senate confirmed. You're also talking about a United States government that has a $4 trillion spend, hundreds of operating units. It's the largest, most complicated, important takeover of any organization, not only on the planet, but in history. So
1,100 Senate confirmed. Have they confirmed all of Obama's yet?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And it did, in a year into the Obama administration, you had a third of the critical positions still unfilled. The Home Alone story with Tim Geithner, he, got confirmed early on at the beginning of February, but it wasn't until May that the second person got confirmed into the agency at Treasury. It's not worked well in the past, and that's a big problem, and that's what we're trying to solve for. But
Bob, do you think this is a good area for Democratic resistance to the Trump administration?
I actually do, depending on what the appointments are. I do not think that Trump ought to be allowed a free hand to move ahead. One of the problems with Trump is, in my view, he has no idea what he's doing, and I think it's dangerous. I liken it to putting in a driver who doesn't know how to drive in a high-powered car on the Autobahn and letting that person go 100 miles an hour.
So can I offer a different analogy? I would say it's like wishing that the pilot of your plane succeeds or doesn't succeed.
Right.
Donald Trump is going to be flying our plane, so we better do what we can to make sure that he succeeds in doing so. I think there's a legitimate position to take that you want to ensure that the people that he appoints are qualified for the jobs, but at the end of the day, getting leadership in, qualified leadership, is absolutely vital.
Rebecca, go ahead.
I want to offer another perspective on it, which is that some of the really gutting, visceral experience of watching this guy who has no idea what the job he's just won, move into his office and Obama said he's going to stick around to help him extra because he doesn't know what he's doing. To see him trained by the black man whose legitimacy he began his career on, when there was a woman who, whatever else you want to say about Hillary Clinton, the most prepared, a woman who would have had those 4,000, probably has a list of those 4,000 names in a closet somewhere right now, who knew literally everything about the job that she was about to walk into. This is not unique to Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama. This is a story of who gets jobs and how in America for a very long time. And the inexperienced guy walking into the office where he doesn't know what he's doing after he has just delegitimized the African-American president who came before him and won over the extraordinarily competent woman is something that for many of us is not unique to this situation. And then the fact, as you're saying, that it is then our responsibility on some level to cheer for him and make sure for all of us to work.
Not just cheer, but to help him.
To help him, to make sure he does that job. I can't leave that without saying that this is gutting for millions of us to be put in this position and to understand that it is now our responsibility to hope that he flies that plane well. It is horrific.
And I think that we can't leave this conversation without acknowledging how emotional this has been for many people. I mean, just as a journalist, as a human being, I'm hearing from people who know I'm a journalist who covers presidential politics. And people are so anguished who voted for Clinton or who are Black or Latino or female or other groups who feel personally vulnerable because of this election in a way that in my long experience doing this, I have never, ever heard in my lifetime, not if people didn't like George W. Bush or didn't like Richard Nixon or didn't like, Clinton or Obama. This is unique.
I've never seen anything like it. What you just said is not in any way an overstatement. I'm getting calls and emails from people I haven't heard from in years. People are sobbing on the phone. I've talked to a couple of classes where the students are sobbing in the classroom. It's really, it's such a raw, emotional situation. It's stunning.
I gave a speech last week, just a few days after, on a very conservative campus in Western Pennsylvania, and it had been long scheduled, and there I was, and I cried while giving the speech. And the crowd of probably about 100 of the students were sobbing, telling stories that their families, immigrants, sexual assault, survivors who reeling from the fact that we just hired a confessed sexual predator to be president. I mean, and it's not letting up. The pain is not the kind of thing where it's like, oh, it's a new week, we're moving on. What I'm hearing from many of my friends is that as the reality sinks in, it is getting much worse.
Max, before you go, because you brought up the fact that national security really needs to be in place in the age in which we live, are there certain positions? I mean, obviously he's going to name a Secretary of State and a Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, I guess, before too long, within the usual range of that. Are there other things that the viewing public might not know about that you think are really important to keep an eye on, that get in place for the sake of our physical safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is that the threats that exist now are not simply the ones that we've seen historically. If you think about cyber as an example, which is fundamental to our lives in all kinds of ways, you think about food safety, the range of ways that our government is essential to our well-being is quite large. And making sure then that qualified people get in place, that they're well prepared, in addition to being qualified, is what the public should be expecting and holding the Trump administration accountable for. We'll have that all available on our website, and I hope that the public will be keeping an eye on it, because you need that leadership in place for the government to work appropriately.
Max, thank you very much. And Rebecca, before you go, I talked to Bernie Sanders earlier today, interviewed him, and he was saying there could be some common ground between Democratic progressives and a not that ideological Donald Trump. Can the grief be channeled at any point to form coalitions?
I mean, in many ways, this is an unanswerable question. I mean, sure, we want infrastructure, we want jobs, we want safer highways, many people who supported Hillary Clinton, the people who supported Hillary Clinton wanted that too. The question is, are we being asked to align with and support and cheer for and partner with a man who ran and won on open misogyny, racism, and xenophobia?
And has appointed Stephen Bannon to one
Yes.
of the highest positions in the administration.
Yes.
Rebecca, thank you. Bob, you're going to stay on as we bring on some additional evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. The shockwave from Donald Trump's victory reached Morocco this week, where world leaders converged for the 17th annual United Nations Climate Change Conference. The president-elect has promised to withdraw the U.S. from the historic climate accord reached in Paris late last year. The deal that almost 200 nations signed on to, which aims to keep down global temperature rise to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. Trump also says that on day one in office, he'll cancel payments to UN climate change programs and grease the skids for the Keystone Pipeline and more production of oil, gas, and so-called clean coal. And we wonder, are there legal and other roadblocks to Trump's undoing Obama's climate legacy? Joining us, Michael Gerrard. He's the Andrew Sabin Professor of Professional Practice at Columbia Law School and faculty chair at the university's Earth Institute. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Bob Herbert is still with us. Can legally the Trump administration pull out of the 200-nation Paris Climate Accord that President Obama signed us on to?
Theoretically, he could only do it with 4 years' notice. As a practical matter, he can do it right away with very few legal consequences. It would make the U.S. a pariah among nations, but he doesn't seem to care about that.
What are we obligated to do under Paris that he could just not do?
The only real obligations under Paris are monitoring and reporting obligations, which we've been doing for years. But we also put forth the non-binding, unenforceable pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain percentage. And he's indicated that he wants to cancel the programs that would enable us to help do that.
He also talks about, on day one, canceling U.S. payments to UN climate change programs. Now, these are really money transfers to developing nations, poorer countries that have not used fossil fuels to develop to industrial nations like we have. But are these, I think the critique on the right is that these are really transfer programs. This is rich countries giving money to poor countries. This is not so much about global warming.
This is helping these poor countries transition their economies to the clean energy system that we need, and to help them prepare for the climate change that is coming, and that our economy, our emissions contributed materially toward creating.
And why does that take our money? Is it more expensive to develop an economy based on renewables than it is based on oil and coal?
It has higher upfront costs to build the wind, the solar terminals, and all of that. So it's not only our money, it's the money from the developed world, as they've agreed to contribute toward that effort.
Myron Ebell is a name in the news now for heading up the environmental part of the transition team, and he's known as a climate denier. Are you familiar with Myron Ebell?
Yes, he comes out of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's for more than a decade been one of the cheerleaders in the squad that denies science and denies climate change. He is a very distressing choice to be in that job.
Bob Herbert, how do you see the politics of this?
Well, I really see it as disastrous both economically and in terms of climate change, because I think the combination of the tax cuts and this all-in on coal and oil and whatever, I just think is the wrong way to go. But I have a question. If the U.S. sort of abandons any kind of serious role in the fight against global warming, what's the domino effect of that, or what's the ripple effect? How do other nations react to our leaving the field?
We don't really know that yet. So far in the Marrakesh talks that are going on now, countries have not been backing off. And in fact, China is trying to position itself as the world's leader on controlling climate change, which is ironic in many fronts. The bigger worry I have, frankly, is India, because the population of India is expected to surpass that of China around 2022. The way that their economy develops will play a central role in what happens to the climate of the future. And I'm afraid the fact that the U.S., as historically the largest greenhouse gas emitter, is backing off will make it more difficult for the leaders of India to take the expensive measures that they need to take.
So is our main role, or one of our most important roles in the Paris Climate Accords, modeling for developing nations?
Well, it's not only modeling. The Paris Agreement was reached largely because the presidents of the U.S. and China got together a year earlier.
For a big bilateral agreement.
That's right, for a huge agreement which set the pace and inspired everybody to go along. And so the U.S., as the historically largest emitter, everybody acknowledges, has a central obligation here.
If we essentially roll back our efforts on climate change for, let's say, 4 years minimum of a Trump administration, how far back does that set us? In other words, let's say a more progressive administration came in 4 years from now. How much ground would they have to make up? How badly would that hurt us?
Before the election, we were right on the precipice of not being able to meet the objective of keeping global temperatures within 2 degrees Celsius. I think that this election may eliminate the chance of being able to keep within that range. We had a lot of momentum, but if instead the next 4 years are devoted to building fossil fuel infrastructure, whose owners are going to want to keep it running for decades, and whose emissions will stay in the atmosphere for centuries, because that's how long greenhouse gases persist in the atmosphere, we will have lost a lot. It's not just 4 years of progress that we will have lost.
With your law professor hat on, and to that point, there's a lawsuit, I gather, by young people in Oregon that a judge has given a green light to proceed, that basically wants to sue, I'm not sure who, either the government or fossil fuels companies, for the pollution of the environment in the future that they will have to live with as they grow up. Familiar with it?
Yes, this was a lawsuit brought against the federal government and the U.S. District Court in Oregon the day after the election denied the motions to dismiss and held that there may well be a substantive due process right to a safe climate. and that it could be the obligation of the federal government to take actions to ensure a safe climate.
And
so the next step would be either a discovery or appeals. The difficulty is that if we have a Supreme Court with one or more Donald Trump appointees on it, it doesn't fill me with confidence that at the end of the day that decision will be upheld.
So where are we going to wind up? Bob, more nuclear power?
Well, that happens to be another one of my questions. There was a time when nuclear power was considered the answer to all our energy prayers. The question now is, one, is nuclear power too expensive and or too dangerous to play a significant role in climate change, or is that a route that we should be pursuing?
If you wanted
remembering, of course, for context, that it does not produce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
So some environmentalists sometimes are interested in nuclear as a transition fuel or something.
If you wanted to start today to build a nuclear power plant, it would take 8 to 10 years and maybe $6 to $8 billion before you got your first kilowatt. If you gave me that period of time and that amount of money, I could produce a whole lot more kilowatts through wind and solar. Eventually, there may be small modular reactors that could make a big difference, but their commercial application seems to be a couple of decades away, and we can't wait for that.
In our last minute, could wind and solar make jobs as part of a Trump infrastructure program?
There are already far more jobs today in solar than there are in coal. And if we accelerate the construction of wind and solar and the associated transmission and so forth to the extent needed, it's an enormous jobs program. I hope that becomes the central part of the infrastructure program that Trump is talking about.
So, Bob, is it possible, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, but that Trump, who sort of will say anything at any time
Right.
in the context of a campaign,
Right.
said global warming was a hoax by the Chinese, then he took away by the Chinese part. Maybe he's now actually in office, actually having to govern, going to take away the hoax part, and he's going to be more like George W. Bush, who said global warming was real but had a relatively conservative path to deal with it.
One, I don't believe that would happen, but even if that did happen, it wouldn't take care of the other issues. He's got Steve Bannon, who was the hero of the white supremacists in this country, in one of the highest positions in his administration. He is considering other appointments that are, in my view, equally vile. So if he happens to be, let's say, more progressive on this issue or that issue, that doesn't do it for me. I think that this is an administration that needs to be fought by progressives from now until the time that they're ousted.
To be continued. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour, keeping watch on the Oval Office and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. Lots more transition news to digest next week. Do join us. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thank you for watching.